Nobody was allowed to touch the boy. That was rule number 1 inside the towering glass mansion at 24 Cranston Hill Drive, nestled in the wealthiest part of Upper Ridge, Connecticut. Every employee, from the head chef to the part-time gardener, had been briefed the same way. Do not attempt to comfort. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not, under any circumstances, touch him. Elliot Whitmore, 2 years old, heir to the Whitmore tech empire, had been diagnosed with extreme sensory dysregulation and selective mutism. In layman's terms, he screamed at sunlight, bit anyone who approached, and hadn't spoken a word in over a year. 6 nannies had quit in the last 8 months. 1 left in an ambulance with bite marks on her shoulder. None of them had lasted more than 2 weeks. And that's when Maya Ellis showed up. She was 27. A black woman with a worn canvas bag, calloused hands, and a background that no one at the agency ever seemed to care about. She didn't have a psychology degree. She didn't drive a Tesla. She arrived by bus 3 transfers from East Hartford and wore her late grandmother's locket like armor. On her first day, no one looked her in the eye. Not even Mr. Whitmore, Charles Whitmore, CEO, 46, widowed. A man whose eyes had long since stopped softening for anything other than market graphs and quarterly reports. He gave Maya a clipboard, a schedule, and one instruction: don't try to fix him. Just keep the house clean. Maya said nothing. She just nodded and got to work. By day 4, she had learned how the house operated. Meals were prepared by a personal chef named Jordan who never smiled. Groceries arrived by drone, and Elliot's entire floor was off limits except during the designated 2-hour window each morning when his speech therapist arrived. But that morning, something wasn't right. There was no therapist. There was no staff. There was only a sharp, shrill cry coming from the upstairs nursery. Maya froze in the hallway. She glanced around. No one else moved. Another cry. Then something shattered. Without thinking, she dropped her mop and ran. The nursery door was ajar. Inside, the air smelled like disinfectant and baby powder. Stuffed animals lay scattered across the floor. Crayon marks covered the wall, and in the middle of the room, Elliot, tiny, wild-haired, his hands clenched into fists, was banging his head against the crib rail. Maya didn't ask permission. She didn't call security. She didn't even pause. She walked in, sat down on the floor, legs crossed like a teacher on story time duty, and started humming. It was a lullaby her grandmother used to sing. Something soft, southern, full of memory. Elliot stopped. He didn't turn, but he stopped as slowly. Maya pulled a small whereupon rabbit from her bag, something she'd kept from her brother's childhood. She placed it gently on the floor, just out of arm's reach. Elliot stared at it. Then, cautiously, he crawled toward it, then past it, until he was in front of her. And then he reached out, not for the rabbit, but for her cheek. His tiny hand touched the side of her face, trembling. And then he leaned in. Maya didn't flinch. She smiled. "Hi there," she whispered. That's when the door slammed open. Charles Whitmore stood there, red-faced, stunned, frozen in disbelief. He took one look at Maya on the floor, Elliot within arm's reach, and the rabbit between them. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he snapped. Elliot jumped back, startled. Maya stood, slow and calm, but didn't back down. "He was hurting himself," she said quietly. "I was trying to calm him. You were instructed not to interact, especially not physically. That's it. You're done. Out. Now." Maya blinked. Charles didn't yell again. He didn't have to. His authority filled the room like smoke. Maya looked at Elliot one last time. The boy sat in the corner, holding the rabbit. His eyes met hers, a look of confusion, not fear. She turned, walked out of the nursery, past the chef, past the marble staircase, past the security guards who suddenly had something to do. No one said goodbye that night. Charles couldn't sleep. He tossed, checked his phone, checked Elliot's monitor. The boy was still, clutching the whereupon rabbit, wrapped in the same throw blanket Maya used. It was 3 a.m. when Charles finally realized what was missing. The crying. It hadn't started. For the first time in over 100 nights, Elliot hadn't cried, not once, and it wasn't because of a drug or a screen or a noise machine. It was because of her. But she was gone. And by sunrise, Charles Whitmore would have to do something he hadn't done in years, admit he'd made a mistake. The mansion had never been this quiet. Even the birds outside seemed to sense something had shifted. The usual alarms at 6 a.m., the soft beeps of the espresso machine, the rhythmic footsteps of the housekeeping staff all faded into the background. But for Charles Whitmore, none of it mattered. He had been up all night, sitting in the darkened hallway outside his son's nursery, watching, listening. The baby monitor lay silent in his lap. No crying, no scratching, no shrieking. Inside the room, Elliot slept curled up like a comma, his tiny arms wrapped around that strange old rabbit, the one Maya had left behind. His breathing was steady, slow. It was unnatural. Or maybe it was natural, and everything before this had been wrong. Charles rubbed his face. He couldn't remember the last time he'd gone 24 hours without yelling at someone. He'd built companies, fired executives, acquired rivals, restructured entire departments in less time than it was taking him to understand his own child. He stood and opened the door a crack. The boy stirred slightly, but didn't wake. And then Charles saw it. The whereupon rabbit warren, faded, tucked against Elliot's chest. Next to it, the edge of a scarf, Maya's scarf, the one she used to keep tied around her waist like a makeshift apron. Elliot had clutched it like a lifeline when she left yesterday. He must have taken it from her bag, or maybe she left it on purpose. Charles stepped into the nursery, slowly, carefully. He knelt beside his son. There was something sacred about this moment. Like if he made a sound, it would all disappear. Like the quiet itself was holy. Elliot stirred. Eyes opened, bleary, slow. And for the briefest second, they locked eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't a scream. It was curiosity. Then Elliot reached for the scarf and turned away. That was the moment Charles realized something that shook him to his core. His son had never once looked at him like that. Downstairs, the housekeeper, Mrs. Carter, a soft-spoken woman in her 60s with 30 years of service, was already preparing tea when Charles entered the kitchen. She raised an eyebrow. "You're up early." "I never slept. I figured." She handed him a mug, the one with the faded #1 dad print he never used. "You fired the only person that child ever trusted." Charles took the mug without drinking. "I was trying to protect him." Mrs. Carter chuckled, not out of humor, but out of disbelief. "From what?" "Kindness." He didn't answer. "You know, sir," she said, wiping down the counter slowly, "I've worked for your family a long time. I watched your wife bring that boy into this world. I held him when she was too tired to. That girl Maya, she didn't just see him. She heard him, even when he wasn't speaking." Charles stared at the floor. "She broke the rule." He muttered. Mrs. Carter looked him dead in the eye. Maybe the rule needed breaking. By midday, Charles was pacing. He called 3 different placement agencies. Maya's name wasn't in any of their databases. He pulled her resume from the staff files, just a scanned paper with barely any contact info. No references, no email, only an emergency contact, a disconnected number. Then he noticed something. The agency name at the top, Second Step Support Services, East Hartford. He dialed. No one answered. He tried again. Finally, a raspy voice on the other end. "Second Step. How can I help you?" Charles didn't introduce himself. "I need to speak to Maya Ellis, urgently." A pause. "We don't give out personal details of former clients. She worked for me. She left something important." Another pause. "Sir, she was here this morning," the voice said. "Dropped off a form to cancel her profile. Said she wouldn't be taking more domestic work. Is she still there?" "She left 10 minutes ago." Charles didn't hesitate. He was already grabbing his keys. "Can you give me an address?" "I'm sorry, I really can't." Click. He was out the door before the voice finished. 35 minutes later, a black Lincoln Navigator pulled up to a cracked sidewalk in East Hartford. This wasn't his world. The buildings were old, weathered, paint peeling off storefronts. People on porches stared as his car passed. Kids played basketball with a half-flat ball under a broken streetlight. He parked and walked into the Second Step Center. It smelled like coffee and photocopier toner. The receptionist glanced up. "Mr. Whitmore, right?" Charles blinked. "How?" "She said you might come." He swallowed. "Is she still here?" The woman shook her head. "Left about 15 minutes ago. Said to give you this." She handed him a folded note. It read, "I don't want a job back. I want respect. For me, for your son, for the idea that healing doesn't always come with a lab coat. If you can promise that, you know where I live. But I won't come back just to be another body in a uniform." Charles stared at the note for a long time. The receptionist said quietly, "She lives in Unit 4B of the red brick building across the street." "But I didn't tell you that." He nodded. "You didn't." He climbed the stairs of the red brick building. No elevator and stood outside Unit 4B. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, Maya was on the phone, holding back tears. Her voice was low, but steady. "No, I don't know how I'm going to pay next month. They cut my hours last week. I had to buy new shoes for Layla, and the heating's broken again." Charles didn't knock. Not yet. He just stood there. Listening. And then Elliot's whereupon rabbit fell out of his coat pocket onto the floor. It landed with a soft plop. The noise made Maya turn. Her eyes widened. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at the rabbit, then looked up at Charles. And for the first time since he'd met her, he looked ashamed. He held out the rabbit, then the note, then said, quietly, "You were right." She crossed her arms. "I don't do apologies for rich people," she said. "You shouldn't have to," he replied. A long pause. Then he asked, voice breaking, "Will you come back? Not as staff, but as someone my son needs?" Maya looked at him. At the rabbit, at the cracked window behind him where sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Then she said, "I'll come back for him. Not for you, but only if you're ready to learn from a woman you never thought you'd listen to." Charles nodded, and for the first time since his wife died, he felt like he was beginning to breathe again. The second time Maya walked into the Whitmore mansion, it felt different. No longer dressed in her uniform, she wore a simple gray sweater and jeans, the knees patched from years of crouching beside children. She carried nothing but a worn backpack and her boundaries. Charles didn't call for staff, didn't give orders. He just stood by the grand staircase, uncertain. A man used to controlling rooms, now unsure how to enter one. Elliot peeked from behind the banister, fingers curled around the railing like vines. His eyes brightened. He didn't run. He didn't speak, but he stayed. That was enough. Maya crouched low. "Hey, bud," she whispered, pulling the old rabbit from her pack. "I kept him warm." Elliot stepped down one stair, then another, then reached for the rabbit with cautious fingers. He held it close, then surprised them both by placing it gently on Maya's knee and offering. Charles turned away, blinking too fast. Maya smiled, but said nothing. She knew this kind of trust had to bloom slowly, like wildflowers pushing through concrete. Later, in the sunroom, the three of them sat in silence. Elliot scribbled on a sheet of butcher paper, circles, lines, then stopped, frowned, and pushed the marker away. Charles leaned forward. "What's wrong?" Maya motioned him back. She knelt beside the boy. "You don't like the red one?" she asked gently. Elliot glanced at the crayon, then pointed to the window. "The garden." Maya looked, then back at his drawing. "You want to draw that?" He blinked twice, his version of a yes. She turned to Charles. "He's thinking in pictures. You need to give him a way to speak them." Charles frowned. "You mean art therapy?" "No," she said softly. "I mean listen to his silence." That night, Maya found the nursery unchanged, pristine, sanitized, sterile. She knelt by the bookshelf. No textures. No sensory tools. No safe places to hide. "Everything's expensive," she said aloud. "But nothing here's made for him." Charles stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "I bought everything the therapists recommended. Maybe they didn't know him the way I do. Maybe you're not qualified to know what he needs." Maya turned to face him, fully, calm, firm. "I'm not a doctor, but I see him. And sometimes that's more than a diagnosis ever could be." Charles stepped into the room. "You think I don't see him? I think you see the version of him you wish he was." Silence. He sat on the window bench, looked at the stars. "I wasn't supposed to be a single parent. Anna handled the bedtime stories, the scraped knees. I just built the future." Maya sat beside him. "And now, I don't know how to be present in the present." "You start," she said, "by just being here, even when it's messy." The next morning, Maya came down early. She entered the garden. The hedges were trimmed, The roses were precise, but the space was cold, decorative. She saw Elliot standing at the glass door, watching her, waiting. She knelt in the dirt dot and began pulling up the flowers. 10 minutes later, Charles appeared, half-dressed, panic on his face. "What the hell are you doing?" "Making a space for him," Maya said. "A real one. You tore out $10,000 worth of landscaping and made room for $10 million worth of connection." He opened his mouth to protest, then stopped, because Elliot was outside, barefoot, no socks, touching the earth. He knelt beside Maya, fingers in the soil. She handed him a small trowel. "You want to help build your garden?" she asked. Elliot looked at her dot, then at Charles' dot, and for the first time he spoke. A whisper, barely audible, but real. "Why?" "Yes, they planted sunflowers, radishes, lavender. Not because they were perfect, but because they were messy, because they grew on their own terms, because Elliot could smell, feel, dig, stomp, and be in the space without judgment. And in that little wild garden, he began to open. That afternoon, Maya sat with Charles in the library. "We need to set some rules," she said. Charles raised an eyebrow. "Rules for whom?" "For us." She pulled out a list. "No white savior nonsense. You listen more than you talk. You don't touch my hair. You never assume what Elliot needs without asking me first. You acknowledge your power and mine." Charles stared at the paper. "You really wrote this?" "I really lived this." He read it again, then nodded. "I can live with these." "Then maybe," Maya said, "we can start building something better. Not just for Elliot, for all of us." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Elliot sat beside Maya in the garden. He pressed his palm into the dirt, lifted it, then looked up at her and said, "It smells like warm." Maya's eyes welled up. She didn't correct his grammar, didn't push for more. She just said, "Yeah, baby, that's exactly what it smells like." It began with a knock. Not the polite, rhythmic kind you hear from a delivery driver or a neighbor asking to borrow sugar. This knock was hard, demanding, like the fist behind it had something to prove. Maya froze. She was in the kitchen with Elliot, helping him rinse strawberries. He was laughing, a new sound, still rare, still fragile. Water dripped from his sleeves. Her hands were wet. Another knock. This time heavier. Maya dried her hands quickly. She told Elliot, "Stay here," and moved toward the front door. The butler had the day off. Charles was upstairs on a call. She opened the door, and the past stepped in. Darius Ellis had always known how to fill a space. 6'2", sleeveless hoodie, a jagged scar across his left cheek from a fight he never talked about. Same blood as Maya, same mother, very different paths. "Maya," he said, chewing the side of his lip like he always did when broke or desperate. She didn't hug him. She didn't smile. "Darius," she said flatly, "you were supposed to be in Atlanta. Got kicked off the site." He muttered, "Union dispute. You know how it is." "No," she replied. "I don't, because I show up on time and keep my promises." He looked past her into the grand marble foyer. "Damn, you really moved up." Maya stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind her. "You can't be here." "Why not?" He shrugged. "Ain't this the land of opportunity?" From the second-floor balcony, Charles Whitmore watched the entire exchange. He couldn't hear the words, but the body language told him enough. Maya's spine had gone stiff. Her eyes were darting. The man's hands, his stance to familiar, to entitled. Charles stepped away from the balcony and started down the stairs. Outside, Darius dropped the act. "I need a place to crash, just for a few days. You got heat, hot water, food?" "No, Maya, come on, you burned your chances. Every single one." He lowered his voice. "What's that kid to you anyway? Some rich brat? You playing mommy for a paycheck now?" She didn't flinch, but her eyes said it all. "You're not just asking for help," she said. "You're trying to drag me back. I'm your brother. You're a reminder." Just then, the door opened. Charles stood there, his expression unreadable. "Everything okay?" Maya turned slowly. "This is my brother," she said. He was just leaving, but Darius didn't move. "Who's this?" he asked, stepping forward. "Your new boss." Charles looked Darius up and down. The scar, The twitchy hands, the coiled anger barely restrained. I think she asked you to leave, Charles said evenly. And I think you should stay out of family business, Darius replied, stepping closer. Maya raised a hand. Don't. Why? Darius snapped. Because he signs your checks. Because you're living in this palace now, talking like them, walking like them. I'm trying to build something, she said, voice trembling but firm. Something better than what we came from. He laughed. You think this white man's gonna save you? You think he sees you as anything other than help? Charles flinched, but Maya didn't. She took a step closer to her brother. He doesn't have to save me. I already saved myself. Later that night, the house was quiet again. Elliot was asleep. The garden swayed in the moonlight. Charles found Maya sitting on the kitchen floor, her back against the cabinet, her hands trembling slightly. He poured her tea, sat down beside her. You didn't owe me an explanation, he said, but you deserve one. She whispered. She told him everything. How she and Darius were raised in and out of foster care. How he'd protected her until he couldn't anymore. How the streets swallowed him up. Drugs, fights, jail, promises, more lies. He shows up when things are good, she said, eyes distant, then ruins them. Charles nodded slowly. I've known men like that, but I've never had a man like you. Listen. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Maya added softly, I'm not used to having a seat at the table. I'm usually serving it. Charles looked at her. Then maybe it's time we both learned how to share it. The next morning, Maya walked into the nursery. Elliot was awake, sitting on the window bench, staring at the garden. He looked up at her. Was that your brother? She blinked. You heard us? He nodded. He was loud. She smiled gently. Yeah, he always is. I didn't like him. Maya knelt beside him. You don't have to. He leaned against her shoulder. Then whispered, you make me feel safe. And that was everything. It began with a blog post. Title, Billionaire's Black Nanny, Sweet Story or Silent Exploitation? Posted by @TheDomesticals, a watchdog blog known for exposing power imbalances in elite American households. The article had no photos, no names, just enough carefully worded allegations and sources close to the family to cause damage. It painted Maya as a caretaker turned live-in companion, and Charles Whitmore as a progressive in public, plantation in private type. It questioned Elliot's progress, Maya's qualifications, and why a woman like her was living in the mansion at all. It didn't take long for it to go viral. By breakfast, Charles was on the phone with his publicist. By lunch, news crews were outside the gates. By dinner, the Department of Child Services had called. A caseworker was coming unannounced. Maya first saw the article when a neighbor's daughter, who followed the blog, texted her, Girl, you okay? They're dragging you. Her hands trembled. Not out of fear but fury. It wasn't the lie that hurt. It was the familiarity. She'd seen this before. A black woman in a white household, loved privately, questioned publicly. The same people who praised her hands in the kitchen, her hugs for the children, suddenly saw her presence as a threat the moment she moved past the maid's quarters. That night, Maya didn't sleep. Neither did Charles. The next morning, a silver sedan pulled up to the gates. Out stepped Ms. Renee Porter, the assigned child welfare caseworker. Late 30s, black woman. No nonsense. Clipboard in hand. Sharp eyes. She was here to assess Elliot's environment, but Maya could feel it in the air. She was also here to assess her. Can we speak privately? Ms. Porter asked Maya. They sat on the back patio, overlooking the garden Elliot and Maya had built. Ms. Porter flipped through her notes. You're not a licensed therapist. No. Not a certified teacher. No. Yet the child is making remarkable progress under your care. Maya nodded once. Yes. Ms. Porter raised an eyebrow. That's a very confident answer, because I've earned his trust. With patience, not paperwork. A pause. Then Ms. Porter leaned forward, her voice quieter. You know how this looks, right? You're a black woman in a white billionaire's house. The optics. They write their own headlines. I'm not here for optics, Maya said firmly. I'm here for Elliot, and the brother who showed up last week. Maya's spine stiffened. That was a personal matter. He threatened the child? No. But he reminded me why I don't run from hard things. Another pause. Then Ms. Porter closed her folder. "I'll need to speak to the child." In the garden, Elliot was kneeling by the sunflowers. Brushing his fingers over the leaves, Ms. Porter approached gently, crouched beside him. "Hi there. I'm Renee. Can I sit?" Elliot didn't respond, but didn't move away. Ms. Porter glanced at the flowers. "You planted these?" He nodded. "They're beautiful." He didn't speak. She glanced back at Maya, then leaned closer. "Do you like living here?" He nodded. "Why?" He thought. Then whispered, "Because the dirt smells like warm." Ms. Porter blinked. Then smiled. "Okay, kiddo. That's the best answer I've ever heard." Back inside, Ms. Porter turned to Charles. "You'll need to register Maya officially as a caregiver if this arrangement continues long term. Right now, everything's informal. I understand. She'll need CPR certification, basic training, and you'll need to make the power dynamics clearer." Charles bristled. "What do you mean? You're employing a woman who has no formal role, living in your home, raising your child. The world sees that and asks, who's really in control here?" He sighed. "Maya's in control. Then let the paperwork reflect that." That night, Charles called Maya to the study. "I want to make this official," he said. "Not just the job, everything. You deserve title, benefits, protections." She tilted her head. "Because of the press?" "No," he said quietly. "Because you matter." Maya crossed her arms. "And what happens when another article comes out? When someone else questions why a woman like me is in a place like this? I stop hiding behind PR statements," he replied, "and I start speaking truth." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a contract. Generous terms, health insurance, a trust fund for Elliot with her as co-guardian if anything happened to Charles, and something else, a title, Family Development Director. Maya chuckled. "That's not even a real title." "It is now," Charles said. "I had my lawyer invent it." She flipped through the pages, then looked at him. "I'll sign, but on one condition. Name it. You speak my name out loud. In public, in your next board meeting, in every space where they whisper about me behind your back. You say, 'This is Maya Jones. She's not my maid. She's my son's lighthouse.'" Charles swallowed hard, then nodded. "I will." Later that night, as Maya tucked Elliot in, he looked up at her. "Are you staying forever?" She paused. "I don't know what forever looks like, baby, but I'm staying as long as your heart needs me." He smiled, not just with his mouth, but with his eyes. And Maya, who had spent her whole life being erased, misunderstood, minimized, felt something new rise in her chest. Belonging. Power shifts quietly. It doesn't announce itself with thunder or ceremony. Sometimes it happens in the subtle way a person stands taller, speaks louder, or begins to be introduced by name. Maya Jones was no longer the maid. She was Family Development Director of the Whitmore household, a title coined by Charles himself, now printed on formal documents, business cards, and mentioned in shareholder meetings. And not everyone liked that. The first ripple came from within. Daniel Firth, a board member at Whitmore Capital, wasn't a man who liked surprises, especially not ones that came in the form of a black woman suddenly attending family-adjacent charity events, sitting beside Charles, or worse, being praised by investors for Elliot's astonishing emotional recovery. He wasn't racist, of course, at least not in the way racists admit to being, but Daniel believed in optics, and in his mind, the image of a powerful white man elevating a domestic black woman to near family status reeked of scandal. And he wasn't alone. Then came the leak, a year-old surveillance clip, grainy and half-muted, from a security camera outside a Bronx community center. It showed Maya before her Whitmore days getting into a shouting match with a woman outside the shelter. Angry, sharp gestures, words lost in the wind. But the body language was clear: tension, confrontation. Within hours, it was on social media, under headlines like, "The Real Maya Jones?" "Violent outburst caught on camera." The clip lacked context. What it didn't show was that Maya had been defending a teenage girl from an abusive stepfather who'd followed her to the shelter. Maya had gotten in his face when no one else would. But nuance doesn't trend. Charles saw the video from his office. He didn't panic. He called Maya immediately, but she was already sitting on the nursery floor. watching it loop on her phone, jaw clenched. "I remember that day," she said flatly. The girl's name was Soraya. She was 16. He sat beside her. "Do you want to make a statement?" "I want to remind people that being loud while black isn't a crime." He placed a hand over hers. "Then we remind them, together, but outside their walls." Pressure mounted. Parents at Elliot's former school voiced concerns about his new caregiver. A right-wing columnist published an op-ed titled, "From Broom to Throne, When Affirmative Action Becomes Personal." And at the next board meeting, Daniel Firth said the quiet part out loud. "With all due respect, Charles, I'm concerned that your personal decisions are compromising the firm's public image. Clarify that." Charles replied, cool but firm, "You've placed a former housemaid in a position of influence. She's unvetted, unqualified, and now controversial." Charles stood. "Let me be clear, Maya Jones is not former anything. She's current, present, necessary. And if the board cannot evolve fast enough to reflect the world we actually live in, then perhaps this board has expired." Silence. Daniel blinked. The vote that day was unanimous. Full support for Charles's leadership. But Maya knew better. Some wars aren't won in rooms. They're won in the spaces after the rooms, on sidewalks, in whispers, in lunchrooms, in algorithms. 2 days later, Charles invited Maya to speak at a foundation gala for mental health and childhood trauma. The invitation list was star-studded: CEOs, senators, media magnates. Maya had never spoken at a podium. She didn't wear designer labels. She didn't know which fork to use for which salad. But she knew pain. She knew healing. And most of all, she knew Elliot. She stood in front of 300 people in a navy dress she'd borrowed from a friend, palms sweating, voice dry. And she began, "When I first met Elliot, he hadn't smiled in 6 months. When I asked him why, he said, 'Smiles are for safe people.' So I made it my job to be safe." She paused. The room leaned in, "Not because I was hired to, but because I saw myself in him. A child misread, mislabeled, misplaced. We didn't need more specialists. We needed more believers." A tear rolled down one woman's cheek in the front row. "And yes, I come from poverty. I come from noise, from violence, from shelters. But I also come from strength, from fire, from survival." A slow clap. Then another. By the time she finished, the entire ballroom was on its feet. Even Daniel Firth. Reluctantly. Later that night, in the car, Maya looked out the window as the city lights blurred by. Charles broke the silence. "You didn't just change Elliot's life tonight. You changed mine." She smiled, then whispered, "Good, because tomorrow, I need you to change the world." 6 months after the gala, everything had changed and nothing had. Maya now had a seat on the board of the Whitmore Foundation for Youth Mental Health. Not a symbolic title, a real seat, voting rights, salary, power. She wore tailored suits sometimes, spoke on panels, was interviewed on NPR and quoted in the New York Times. But she still packed Elliot's lunch, still sat on the edge of his bed when nightmares slipped in, still picked up his sock puppet from under the couch, smiling like it was a diamond. She was Maya. And she was everywhere. Then came the offer. The Aspen Institute wanted her. A 6-figure position, relocation, national influence. The job title? Director of Equitable Child Policy. It was a dream and a dilemma, because while Charles encouraged her to consider it, and the world whispered, "You've outgrown that house," one voice hadn't spoken yet. Elliot's. The night before her final decision, she sat with him in the garden. Sunflowers surrounded them. Taller now, stronger, just like him. "I got a job offer," she said softly. He nodded. He'd heard. "It's big, important. I could help lots of kids." He stared at the dirt. "But I'd have to move." Still no response. "I wouldn't be here every morning, or every night." She reached into her pocket, pulled out a tiny carved wooden elephant, the first toy he ever handed her, back when he hadn't spoken a word. "I want you to keep this," she said, placing it in his palm. Then she turned to go, and just as she rose to her feet, "Stay." The word cracked through the dusk like a match. Maya froze. Turned. He was still seated, but his eyes were wide, shimmering. "Please stay." 2 words. 2 words that didn't just request her presence. They anchored it. She knelt, took his hands. Why? She whispered. Elliot looked up. Because you're my voice. The next morning, Maya declined the offer. The recruiter didn't understand. Is this about money? We can adjust the package. No, Maya said. Career growth. No. Then why? She smiled. Because I already have the most important job in the world. Months passed. Elliot began speaking more. Then, laughing. Then leading. He helped Maya design a new after-school program for trauma-affected children of color. One that combined gardening, therapy, puppets, and music. They called it the Dirt Smells Like Warm Project. Soon, there were 5 centers, then 10, then partnerships with schools and shelters. Maya became the face of a movement, but she never let the title outshine the truth. None of this matters if the kids don't feel safe. One afternoon, a reporter from PBS sat down to interview Maya. At the end, she asked, if you could go back and say one thing to your younger self before the mansion, before Elliot, before the sunflower garden, what would you say? Maya thought. Then said, they will try to erase you. They will rename you, reframe you, rewrite you. But you are not disposable. You are the page, the pen, the damn book. The clip went viral. But Maya didn't watch it. She was too busy. That evening, she was in the backyard again, watering sunflowers. And Elliot, he smiled every day now. But some days on the quiet ones he still found his way into her lap, curled up like a memory, whispering nonsense or asking questions about clouds. And every time she felt the world pressing at the gates again, racism, doubt, fear, trolls online, she held him a little tighter and whispered back, we are enough.